On this vote, the yeas are 296, the nays are 121. The conference report is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The House will be in order. The House will be in order. The Chair would like to ask all present to rise for the purpose of a moment of silence. The Chair asks that the House now observe a moment of silence in honor of our brave men and women in uniform who have served or fallen in Afghanistan, and in honor of all who have served or fallen in Operation Iraqi Freedom, as it draws to a close at the end of this year. Our men and women return home having freed Iraq from a vicious tyrant, thwarted a violent insurgency that threatened the Iraqi people, and helped build a stable and democratic government that is a friend of the United States. We honor the hard work and sacrifice of our service members and the courage of their families. We'll observe a moment of silence. Without objection, 5-minute voting will continue. The unfinished business is a vote on the adoption of House Concurrent Resolution 94, on which the yeas and nays were ordered. The clerk will report the title of the concurrent resolution.
House Concurrent Resolution 94, concurrent resolution directing the clerk of the House of Representatives to make corrections in the enrollment of H.R. 3672.
The questions on the adoption of the concurrent resolution, members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote.
By a vote of 296 to 121, the U.S. House finishes work on 2012 spending, a nearly $1 trillion measure which includes funds for defense, education, environmental regulation, medical research, and water projects. They also considered this afternoon separate legislation providing nearly $9 billion in disaster relief. This first vote, though, is a measure requiring across-the-board spending cuts to pay for that disaster aid. This is a 5-minute vote.
On this vote, the yeas are 255, the nays are 165. The concurrent resolution is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. House will be in order. The House will be in order. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order for 1 minute for the purposes of informing the members of the House schedule.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As members are aware, there are ongoing conversations in the Senate over how to proceed on the House's Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act. At this time, the fate of the Senate's conversations are unclear. Therefore, we will conclude our business for the week at the end of this vote series. Should the Senate follow regular order and amend the House's bill, I'd expect us to return to review and potentially consider their proposed changes. As all of my colleagues are painfully aware, the Senate has the ability to move both as quickly and as slowly as it wants. So it is difficult to predict So it is difficult, Mr. Speaker, to predict if or when we may need to return. My best guess is that the earliest we would return is this Monday, December 19th. But I can assure my colleagues that we will provide at least 24 hours notice prior to scheduling any further votes in the House this year. With that, Mr. Speaker, I wish all of my colleagues a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and a Happy Holidays.
Will my friend yield?
Yes.
Just to clarify, it is my understanding, therefore, that we do intend, before we leave for the year, to address the House-passed bill or a Senate version thereof. I yield back. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, as I indicated earlier, it is all pending the Senate's action. And as I indicated, no one really knows how quickly or slowly that will occur and if it will occur. And, Mr. Speaker, I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. Without objection, 5-minute voting will continue. The unfinished business is the vote on passage of H.R. 3672, on which the yeas and the nays were recorded. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 3672, a bill making appropriations for disaster relief requirements for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2012, and for other purposes.
The question is on the passage of the bill. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
Well, you heard the Majority Leader Eric Cantor there laying out the possible schedule, saying the earliest the House is going to come back would be Monday, this Monday, the 19th. And the reason is for dealing with the Social Security payroll tax cut. The House passed its version earlier this week, so it's likely that the House will come back next week to deal with that. That payroll tax cut expires at the end of the year, and if it's not dealt with, it would raise the payroll tax cut from the reduced 4.2 back up to 6.2%. The Hill writes about that this afternoon, saying that the key stumbling block to a final deal on the payroll tax holiday is GOP language intended to pressure the Obama administration into approving the Keystone Oil Sands pipeline from Alberta, Canada, to the Gulf Coast. They write that Speaker Boehner told Republican lawmakers during a closed-door conference this afternoon that he would insist that the language be included in the payroll tax measure. That's from the Hill this afternoon, so we'll have to wait and see on the House schedule. We do know this will be the last roll call vote on legislation. This is the bill that provides the disaster relief, $8.1 billion in disaster relief. There may be a vote coming up on a motion to adjourn. The spending measure for fiscal year 2012, the 9 remaining spending bills, nearly $1 trillion in total, that passed the House by a vote of 296 to 121. Just to give you a breakdown, at 147 Republicans and 149 Democrats voting aye, and voting against the measure, 86 Republicans and 35 Democrats.
On this vote, the yeas are 351, the nays are 67. The bill is passed. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. House will be in order. Does he? Does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I send to the desk a joint resolution, H.J. Res. 94, and ask unanimous consent for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the joint resolution.
House Joint Resolution 94, joint resolution making further continuing appropriations for fiscal year 2012 and for other purposes.
Is there an objection to the consideration of the joint resolution?
Reserving the right to object, and I will not object, I yield to the distinguished chairman to explain this CR.
I thank the gentleman for yielding.
Could we have order?
House will be in order. Members will please take their conversations off the floor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Gentleman may proceed.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. This continuing resolution extends funding for government operations by 1 day to give the other body an extra day to consider and pass the Consolidated Appropriations Bill. I yield back.
I withdraw my objection.
Without objection, the joint resolution is engrossed, read a third time, and passed, and the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. For what purposes does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I send to the desk a joint resolution, H.J. Res. 95, and ask unanimous consent for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the joint resolution.
House Joint Resolution 95, joint resolution making further continuing appropriations for fiscal year 2012 and for other purposes.
Is there an objection to the consideration of the joint resolution?
Reserving the right to object,
Gentleman reserved.
and I will yield to the chairman to explain the amendment.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. This continuing resolution ensures that government operations will continue to be funded through December 23rd. The resolution is a simple date extension that gives Congress time to prepare the Consolidated Appropriations Bill for presentation to the President. This is a non-controversial measure that has sign-off from both sides of the aisle, and I urge its adoption. I yield back.
I withdraw my objection and urge a positive vote.
Gentleman withdraws. Without objection, the joint resolution is engrossed, read a third time, and passed, and the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. This is the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at 10 a.m. on Monday next.
Without objection. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Ryan, be authorized to insert extraneous material in the record.
Without objection, so ordered. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to have my name removed as a co-sponsor of H.R. 3589. I was added to the wrong version of that bill.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you.
The chair will entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. Purposes, the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition. Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to honor the 150th anniversary of Boulder County, Colorado. Boulder County is one of 17 Colorado counties officially created in 1861 by the Territory Assembly. In the mid-1800s, settlers began flocking to Boulder County because of the robust and profitable mining sector. Local businesses were created to support the growing number of new miners to the area. The original founders of Boulder had more aspirations than just to be a simple Colorado mining town. Residents pushed strongly in the Territorial Assembly to have the state university located in the region. In 1877, 1 year after Colorado was admitted to the United States, the University of Colorado, the state's first university, opened its doors. From its early status as a college town and mining community, Boulder County has expanded to the population now reaching over 300,000 people. The picturesque scenery and outdoor lifestyle has allowed this county to grow significantly over the past 150 years. Aside from the University of Colorado, Boulder County boasts an excellent technology sector, numerous small business, countless microbreweries. One of my personal favorites is Oscar Blues Brewing Company in Longmont, Colorado. This region of Colorado continues to rate high in national polls for overall health and well-being and is rated as one of the best places to raise a family in the country. Boulder County is the gateway to the Rocky Mountains. It's known for its tremendous outdoor recreation, from skiing, hiking, fishing, hunting, and biking, just to name a few. Boulder is an outdoorsman's town. It is my honor to recognize the 150th anniversary of Boulder County on the House floor. I yield back.
Are there further 1-minute requests? For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was recently discovered that a Venezuelan national prone to anti-American activity is present and active on U.S. soil. Livia Antonieta Acosta Noguera, Consulate General of Venezuela in Miami, has been linked to a potential cyber attack on the United States involving affiliates of the Iranian, Cuban, and Venezuelan regimes. In 2008, while serving at the Venezuelan embassy in Mexico, Ms. Noguera worked with members from the Iranian and Cuban embassies to develop plans for an attack on critical U.S. government infrastructure systems. Ms. Noguera's actions demonstrate her willingness to undermine U.S. interests by partnering with Iran and Cuba, two U.S. designated state sponsors of terrorism. This discovery heightens our concern for the growing Iranian presence in the hemisphere. The Obama administration should take decisive action against Iran in order to prevent the development of any sort of Latin American-Iranian diplomatic relations. This is an essential component of the preservation of our national security, and if the allegations are found true, it begins with the immediate diplomatic expulsion of Ms. Noguera. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas rise? House is not in order. Gentlelady is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, we just finished debating and reviewing, although the time was very short, the language that would fund this nation. That is our duty. I'm concerned, however, that some of the cuts impacted our seniors, our young people, and our environment. We must do better. And I certainly disagree with cutting again the appropriations for this nation, impacting our veterans and their families another 2%. I voted against it, and I believe that we must ensure that if America is hit by a disaster, we pay for it. We have to fight this fight again. However, Mr. Speaker, as our soldiers return, thank the members for wearing the yellow ribbon, but I ask you to go home and yellow ribbon your district offices, ask your cities and hamlets and states to put yellow ribbons out to welcome the troops who are coming home and say a job well done. It ended yesterday with the casing of the colors in Iraq. It is our obligation and duty to not let one soldier come home to a silent America and a silent community. I yield
time
back.
has expired. Are there further one-minute requests? Gentleman from Tennessee. Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I awoke this morning to unfortunate news. A friend of mine and one of the world's most brilliant writers and intellects, Christopher Hitchens, passed away yesterday. Christopher Hitchens was a brilliant man who was a writer and a provocateur. You may not have disagreed with him, you may not have agreed with him, but I think everybody knew that Christopher Hitchens was well versed on the subject in which he spoke and could express it in a way unlike any other. I don't think there was a more erudite, knowledgeable individual on the face of this earth. He's left us. To me, he was a good friend. He made my visit to Washington here easier. To his friends, he was a loyal, gracious, and fun. To his foes, he was a feared enemy, a feared foe. The world was lucky for his being here, and I was lucky for my life intersecting with his. The world shall miss him. A life well lived. Rest in peace, my friend. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Are there further one-minute requests? Are there further one-minute requests?
Pardon?
Hearing none, under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Fortenberry, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Majority Leader. The House is not in order. If the members would please leave the floor for their conversations, take their conversations elsewhere. Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday marked the official end of America's 9-year war in Iraq. In a low-key ceremony in Baghdad, U.S. troops lowered the American flag of command that flew over the Iraqi capital. The 4,000 remaining U.S. service members in Iraq will leave by this year's end. The Iraq war was a painful and difficult time, extraordinarily costly in terms of America's lives and resources. Nearly 4,500 Americans, including 45 Nebraskans, were killed in Operation Iraqi Freedom. 227 Nebraskans were wounded in combat. Tens of thousands of Iraqis lost their lives. We lost good men and women, individuals full of life and blessed with talent, whose proud families awaited their return to the country they loved so dear and served so well. But in spite of our wounds, we are proud. Proud of our fallen heroes, proud of the veterans who have come back to us, proud of their sacrifice, proud of their noble vision that has significantly changed the global environment, where democratic ideals are now making steady gains everywhere. The work of our troops, steadily done in the midst of extensive public debate and strategy deliberations about the war, was the strength of this mission. These troops achieved what was set before them. The victories were theirs. Their unwavering commitment, their skill, and their bravery got the job done. The troops' efforts unbound an Iraqi people held hostage for decades by an egomaniacal dictator. Insurgencies led by terrorists seeking to wreak havoc and disorder were put down by our troops. Space was created to allow Iraqis the time necessary to build the foundations of a representative government and a more open society. But there are still challenges and significant obstacles. It would have been preferable, Mr. Speaker, for a small stay-behind force to remain for ongoing response and stabilization efforts. The way forward will not be easy. But today, Iraqis determine Iraq's future. No longer constricted by the dictates of a despot, they have held elections, they have written a constitution, and hopefully they will build a culture that respects the rights and dignity of all of their people. America and the world needs a stabilized Iraq. Our security is strengthened by it, and we will continue a strong diplomatic relationship to help achieve it. An Iraq that protects the rights of all of its people, Sunni and Shiite, Christian and Yazidi, and employs a government that maintains order and preserves liberties, will be an Iraq that can help transform the entire Middle East, looking for a new way forward. The foundation for this has been laid, after much toil and bloodshed, by valiant American soldiers who return to us now as modern-day heroes. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
He's taking the balance for an hour. Do you have a 1 minute or? No.
Honored Speaker, the gentleman from Georgia remains at the hour.
All right. Under the Speaker's announced policy, the gentleman from Georgia has the remainder of the time.
Yeah, we didn't know.
Mr. Speaker, I very much appreciate the time, and I want to get to tax policy here in just a moment, but I want to take just a few minutes, having just passed the appropriations bill for FY 2012, to talk about how long that's been. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know you have been a proponent of regular order since you came to this body. But as I went back and looked to say, when was the last time the House was able to operate not under a continuing resolution, but under a regular appropriations process, Mr. Speaker, it's been since December of 2009. December of 2009 is when we last passed an appropriations bill. An appropriations bill. Now, granted, appropriations bills come in all sorts of sizes. The one we're dealing with today came in the large size. We'll call that the jumbo size. My hope is, and I know the minority whip shares my passion for that, my hope is we'll be able to get to regular order for next year and go through each appropriations bill one by one by one. But what I say to you, Mr. Speaker, is that I came to this body a year ago to make a difference. And I wanted to make all the difference last January, I'll be honest with you. And when I couldn't do it all in January, I hoped that we could do it all in February. When we couldn't do it all in February, I hoped we could do it all in March. And, of course, we were able to pass the budget here in the House, the budget that took the first step towards reforming entitlements that we've seen come out of this body since, I would argue, since Lyndon Johnson began these programs in the 1960s. But we have begun to make a difference. As I look at this stack of papers here that represents the spending, the appropriations process for 2012, Mr. Speaker, it's the first time in 2 years we've had that. Of course, over 1,000 days since the Senate has been able to pass a budget. We have made progress. As 2011 comes to a close, I hope we can celebrate some of those successes along the way. Because in terms of real spending, Mr. Speaker, in this document, what we see is, for the second year in a row, first time since World War II, 2 consecutive years, Mr. Speaker, with this leadership team and this Appropriations Committee and this bipartisan House, we've been able to reduce federal discretionary spending. $95 billion. $95 billion. You know, a lot of folks say, well, Rob, is that going to be funny math? Is that going to be just some items but not all items? As you know, Mr. Speaker, that's everything. That's the regular appropriations process. That's the so-called emergency spending. That's the war spending, what they call the OCO account. That's everything, and we've brought it down $95 billion in just 1 year, just the 1 year that you and I have been here, Mr. Speaker, $95 billion. But it can't all be done in appropriations bills, Mr. Speaker. You know, only about a third of all the money that goes out of the door here in Washington, D.C., goes out of the door through this process that we did today, the appropriations process. The rest of it goes out through mandatory spending programs, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, interest on the national debt, those mandatory spending programs. And in fact, as you know, Mr. Speaker, we could zero out everything else. We could decide there will be no Congress, there will be no White House, there will be no FBI, there will be no Army, there will be no Navy, no Marine Corps, no Coast Guard, no Air Force, no parks, no Environmental Protection Agency, no Education Department, no nothing. We could zero out absolutely everything that we fund through the appropriations process, and the budget still wouldn't be balanced. Still wouldn't be balanced. Zeroing out everything, not cutting it, zeroing it out, and we still couldn't balance the budget just on appropriations bills alone. Well, there's two sides of every budget balancing operation, Mr. Speaker, as you know. There's the spending side and there's the revenue side. I want to talk about the revenue side here for just a minute. I've put up a poster here, Mr. Speaker. You can't see it from where you sit, but it says H.R. 25, the fair tax. And I'm going to leave it up here the whole half hour, Mr. Speaker, because H.R. 25, named the fair tax, is the only tax bill in Congress, the only piece of legislation on either the House side or the Senate side that goes into the tax code and says every exception, exemption, exclusion, special carve-out, special favor, anything that gives you a break over your neighbor, your company an advantage over the one next door, all of those tax breaks, special exceptions, loopholes, gone. Gone. It's the only bill in either the House or the Senate that does it, but that's not even the good news, Mr. Speaker. The good news is it's also the most popular fundamental tax reform bill in either the House or Senate as well. That's right. More members of this body have co-sponsored the fair tax than any other fundamental tax reform legislation that's been introduced here. And more United States senators in the other body have co-sponsored their version of the fair tax than any other fundamental tax reform proposal in the Senate. Now, why is that important? Why is it important to end all the loopholes? Well, Mr. Speaker, the chart I have here is the cost of tax expenditures. Now, tax expenditures, I got to tell you, that's a tough word in conservative circles, right? Because the government doesn't actually have any money. As you know, Mr. Speaker, every nickel that gets spent in Washington, D.C. got sucked into Washington, D.C. From the heartland, from back in my district in Georgia. From back in your district, from somebody's family kitchen table, every nickel that gets spent in Washington got sucked up here to Washington, D.C. So oftentimes when we talk about taxes and we talk about giving people their money back, that's not spending. That's giving people their own hard-earned money back. But today, Mr. Speaker, when we have $15 trillion in national debt, when the amount of money we owe has eclipsed the entire productive capacity of America for an entire year, our entire annual GDP, the question now is, when you have a tax break, when you agree to let a loophole into the tax code and let somebody else pay less, what happens? Well, what happens is that we then borrow more. That's a new debate, Mr. Speaker, because so often we can talk about tax cuts like the capital gains tax cut, like interest and dividends. We can talk about tax cuts that stimulate the economy, tax cuts that we think will help the economy to grow faster and bring more revenue in, but all tax cuts aren't like that. Some tax cuts are just free money that you're giving away to people. Instead of passing a bill that says, I hereby give you $100, it makes Congress feel better to pass a bill that says, I hereby tax you $100 less. I'm going to bill your neighbors for it, I'm going to bill your kids for it, I'm going to bill your grandkids for it, but I'm going to tax you $100 less. And it's time, Mr. Speaker, for us as conservatives to be honest about where the tax code takes this country when we fill it full of loopholes and exemptions, because I will tell you, and you know better than most, Mr. Speaker, the art of the loophole is a time-honored Washington tradition. Time-honored. And it's not something that's been perfected by Republicans. It's not something that's been perfected by Democrats. It's not even something that was perfected by the Whigs, Mr. Speaker. It's been around as long as taxes have been around. And folks who work in this town to try to manipulate the tax code have been around just as long as well. But let's look at this. Let's look at what's happening in 2012. Just 2012. The annual budget deficit for 2012, Mr. Speaker, is projected by the Joint Committee on Taxation and the Congressional Research Service, $1,100 billion and change. $1,100 billion projected budget deficit for 2012. Mr. Speaker, how much money do you think that we've carved out in loopholes and exceptions and exemptions and carve-outs and deductions and credit? How much money do you think we've carved out? $1,065 billion. Now, that's a powerful message, Mr. Speaker. We could balance the budget this year if we eliminated every single tax break in the U.S. tax code. Now, that's a debate worth having. I don't want to eliminate every single deduction in the U.S. tax code, every single credit in the U.S. tax code. Every credit in the U.S. tax code is not created equal. Every deduction in the U.S. tax code not created equal. There are some that help move this economy forward. There are some that don't, and that's the debate that we have, and this is the end result of it. What if we started over from scratch, Mr. Speaker? What if we start over from scratch with a bill like the fair tax, something that ends all loopholes by starting a tax code that has no loopholes? Ends the loopholes by starting a tax code that has no loopholes. You know, so often we talk about reforming the tax code as if we're stuck with the tax code that we've got. Are we? I tell you we're not. That's what this body does. This body could zero out the entire tax code and start again with a blank sheet of paper tomorrow. We have that ability. We have that authority, and we ought to use it. And if we used it today, again, just to understand the magnitude of the exceptions and exemptions in the tax code, when you go and you say, well, golly, I'm in the 15% bracket, I'm in the 25% bracket, I'm in the 10% bracket, when you talk about those things, the exceptions and exemptions total over $1 trillion in 2012 alone. Now, where are those? Where are those exceptions and exemptions going, Mr. Speaker? This next chart quantifies those. Number one, list of exceptions and exemptions. Exclusion of employer contributions for medical insurance premiums and medical care. $609 billion. Hear that, Mr. Speaker. Half of all the money that's included in loopholes, exemptions, exceptions, exclusions, carve-outs in the United States tax code, half of it goes to employers to subsidize their purchase of health insurance for their employees. And candidly, Mr. Speaker, I hear from employees day after day after day after day who say, Rob, how come I don't get those same tax breaks to purchase my own insurance? Why am I held captive captive by my employer. Since when did my employer get entrusted to make the best health decisions for me and my family? I will tell you, this provision that originated in World War II with wage controls here in Congress has led to so many of the third-party payer problems, the health insurance inflation challenges that we have in this country today. Mr. Speaker, do I need to yield to allow our friends from the Senate to deliver a message?
The chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the Senate.
Madam Secretary.
As 2009, cited as the Insular Areas Act of 2011, in which the concurrence of the House is requested.
The gentleman from Georgia may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, candidly, I'm a little disappointed. I was yielding to that message from the Senate because I thought it might have been the passage of the fair tax across the way. But I'm not going to give up hope that that's going to happen because it makes a difference. $609 billion is what you, Mr. Speaker, and your family and every other American family has to pay more because we've chosen to subsidize the business purchase of health insurance, which has the secondary and tertiary effects of trapping you in the job that you have because you can't get insurance at your next job, that has the effect of trapping you with the insurance policy that you have because your employer only offers one policy, that has the effect of you having a third-party payer so it insulates you from the true cost of health care. Trouble after trouble after trouble with the American health care system comes from the United States tax code, Mr. Speaker, and we can do better. $357 billion is the deductibility of mortgage insurance on owner-occupied homes. Mortgage insurance deduction. Again, a deduction that millions of American families take advantage of. A deduction that arguably has a tremendous effect on the real estate market and our real estate agents and our construction companies, on and on and on, things tied into the deductibility of mortgage insurance. I remember once upon a time, Mr. Speaker, I was listening to a elected official talk, and he had some folks in his office, and they said, we have to have deductibility of mortgage insurance because the only reason we're able to sell real estate in this country is because folks were able to deduct their insurance and deduct their interest, and that makes a difference. And this elected official said, well, how about if we double interest rates? Is that going to help us sell more homes? Because it'll certainly help folks deduct more interest. And the answer is no. What we need are low interest rates to sell homes. We have low interest rates in this country today, but it's one of those things that, for whether Republicans or Democrats, folks have agreed that we want to subsidize interest payments for folks who own homes. There is no such subsidy program for folks who rent. Is there a good reason for that? Maybe there is. Certainly the argument has been made time and time again, but it's something that we have chosen to do in this country, Mr. Speaker, and I don't know that even for those Americans that defend this deduction to their dying breath, do they know that it comprises a full third of the value of every deduction, exemption, exclusion that exists in the United States tax code, because it does. Half of the deductions and exclusions coming from the mortgage interest deduction, others from the medical insurance and premium deduction for employers. And finally, of the biggest of our deductions and exemptions, the deduction for 401k plans. Down here at the bottom, $356 billion. Again, deducting money that we're saving, right? Because the power to tax is the power to destroy, Mr. Speaker. You know that. Time and time again, as you advocate for lower taxes, because what we tax today is income, and what income is a measure of your productivity, and what we need in today's economy is more productivity, not less productivity. Power to tax is the power to destroy. So rather than taxing savings, because we don't have enough retirement savings happening in this country, we don't have enough thrift happening in this country, we've given folks a tax break to encourage them to save. Is that a laudable public goal, Mr. Speaker? I'm sure it is. I'm sure that it is. We need more Americans to take saving for their retirement more seriously. The question is, what's the best way to get that done? Is it the United States tax code? But does America know that that's what's happening today? That today, $356 billion of tax revenue is foregone in the name of encouraging retirement savings. It's a debate that has to happen in Washington, D.C. These are the big ones. Because so often we argue about things as if it's the little ones that find the dollars. It's not the little ones that find the dollars. It's the little ones that find the headlines. You don't find headlines about the mortgage interest deduction or the employer health insurance deduction. You find headlines about the bridge to nowhere and how in the world that got in the transportation bill. But understand that this is big business. Now, I'm not here to pick on lobbyists, Mr. Speaker. I think lobbyists perform an important role in this town. I can't be an expert on every issue, and I can't hire staff. I've got Alex Perot and my staff down here today. He knows a lot about a lot, but he can't know everything about everything. And so when I need more information, I will go to folks involved in the industry. We call those folks lobbyists. I'll tell you the best lobbyists in the world are the folks who fly up from back home. The teachers in your community, the caretakers in your community, the physicians in your community, those members of your community who come up here to talk about their issues, those are the best lobbyists in town. But there are firms up here that have lobbyists as well. There was a line in The Distinguished Gentleman, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to date myself by going back to when Eddie Murphy's movies were early and funny back in the day. And The Distinguished Gentleman was a tale of a fellow who got elected to Congress by accident, and he was going along with the process, and he walked up to a powerful committee chairman, and the committee chairman said, "How do you feel about sugar subsidies?" And Eddie Murphy, being Eddie Murphy, and a new congressman said, "Well, Mr. Chairman, how should I feel about sugar subsidies?" And the chairman said, "It doesn't matter, because if you support sugar subsidies, we're going to get you money from the confectioners and the bakers. And if you oppose sugar subsidies, we're going to get you money from the cane growers and the beet growers." There are folks on every side of the issue, Mr. Speaker, in this town. And so whenever there's an issue it's a contentious issue, you can call in one side, you can call in the other, and you can hear both sides of the argument. Folks who are experts, folks who have been working on these issues for decade after decade after decade. Well, when the federal tax bill for America's businesses, Mr. Speaker, is $10 billion, $10 billion, it doesn't take much of an investment in lobbying for special exemptions in the tax code to make that happen. Now, let me go back and look at corporate income taxes over time. I'm in the camp that tells you corporations don't pay taxes, Mr. Speaker. Corporations do not pay taxes. Consumers pay taxes. If you go and you add, I'm from Atlanta, if you add a tax on the Coca-Cola company, what do you think is going to happen? They're going to raise the price of Coca-Cola. Right? That's what happens every single time. We already have a competitive market. Coke and Pepsi are competing in a cutthroat beverage market out there today. They're already suppressing their prices as much as they can. There's only one taxpayer in America, and it's the American consumer. When we tax businesses, we just make the businesses the tax collector, and they raise their prices. I end up paying the tax when I buy the good. They collect those taxes and pass them on. But according to our friends at Citizens for Tax Justice, and you're not going to hear me quoting Citizens for Tax Justice very often, Mr. Speaker, because we don't agree on a lot, but they pay a lot of attention to how much money is being spent in this town to manipulate the tax code. To manipulate the tax code. They say $475 million is being spent to manipulate the tax code in this town. Now, folks, it's our fault. We created the tax code. I don't blame the IRS for the way the tax code works. Congress created the tax code. Congress tells the IRS what to do. So for businesses to spend $475 million, for individuals to pay folks to come and lobby for the United States tax code, that makes sense. Why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Why do you lobby the tax code? Because that's where the money is. Not in these appropriations bills that we're doing today. but in the tax code. Trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars in revenue, Mr. Speaker, and with a stroke of a pen, a loophole, an exception, exemption hidden somewhere in what is now 76,000 pages of code, you can save money for your client. You can get a break that your competitor doesn't get. And who ends up paying that bill? Every other American family. And if we don't pay that bill today, we end up borrowing that money. And our kids pay the bill, and our grandkids pay the bill for years and years and years to come. This isn't rocket science, Mr. Speaker. This is Economics 101. Economics 101. I do it when I go to speak to high school classes. I say, you know, I've got a job in my congressional office. You're going to get to serve your neighbors. You're going to get to serve your country. It's going to be a wonderful thing. And I pay $10 an hour. Who wants to come? So all the hands go up around the room. Then I say, but I'm going to have to put a tax on that because we've got bills to pay in this country. So I'm going to put a $9 an hour tax on that, but you're still going to get to take home that last dollar. Who wants to come work 80 hours a week for me for $1 an hour? And all the hands go down, Mr. Speaker. That's Economics 101. There's a sweet spot here. You know, they called it the Laffer curve in the 1980s. There's a sweet spot for where you can raise tax rates and continue to raise income to the government, tax receipts. And if you exceed that rate, you begin to shrink tax receipts to the government. I remember the story, Mr. Speaker. It was over on the Senate side. Senator from Washington State ran the Finance Committee at the time, and the question was, what would happen if we raised taxes to 100% on all Americans who make over $250,000 a year? What would happen? What would happen if we raised taxes on all Americans making over $250,000 a year to 100%? Well, he asked that question to the tax scoring committee, and folks got excited, sent back a good message, and said, oh, golly, if we did that, we'd raise this big pot of money to help pay federal bills. Big pot of money. Well, come on, Mr. Speaker. You tell me what would happen if we raised taxes on you to 100%. Well, I tell you, you'd quit coming to work. You've got a heart for service, but you also have bills to pay. Folks would adjust their behavior. No one would make over $250,000 a year anymore. The power to tax is the power to destroy. When you tax at 100%, you destroy 100% of all of that economic production. You know what's sad as I look at this Economics 101 chart, Mr. Speaker, is that it's America that has this disastrous, destructive, detrimental tax code. The former Soviet bloc countries, Mr. Speaker, they have flat taxes. They have consumption taxes. They started with a blank slate after the fall of the Soviet Union, and they created tax codes that work. They rejected the communist system and said, what if we have a flat tax on everything that's easy to pay? Mr. Speaker, I know we have to have taxes in this country, and I don't mind paying them. Don't mind paying them. I love the freedom that we have in this country, and I know freedom isn't free. What I don't like, Mr. Speaker, is having to pay someone to help me pay my taxes. I'm a smart guy. To have to pay someone to help me pay my taxes. If we're going to collect taxes from folks, it ought to be easy, and the more complicated we make it, the less revenue we collect. And who has proven that point? The former Soviet bloc countries. That's where we look for economic vibrance today, Mr. Speaker. That's where we look for tax code success today. Country after country after country throughout their old code adopted a flat consumption tax, a flat income tax, made it easy to pay, easy to comply with, and raised the revenues to their national treasuries. We could do that very same thing. There's a sweet spot, and we are not in it. Mr. Speaker, we sometimes get swept up in partisanship here in the House. I know you avoid it. I try to avoid it, but sometimes it happens. But when it comes to the issue of reforming the tax code, it's not a partisan issue. I'll point to this quote from President Barack Obama in a speech he was making on international tax policy reform. He says, "Our tax code is full of corporate loopholes that make it perfectly legal for companies to avoid paying their fair share." Now, his take on it's a little different from mine. You know, the U.S. tax code defines what folks have to do. I almost think it's your patriotic duty to pay as little tax as you legally can. Don't send your extra money up here. Whoever's encouraging you to do that, don't do it. Keep as much as your own money as you can, because I promise you, you're going to spend it better than I will. It's not from lack of trying. It's not from lack of trying. Keep your own money in your pocket. Send as little as you legally can. But yes, the tax code has been warped over time to make it very difficult to tell what is someone's fair share. What is their fair share? Now, the top 10% of all income earners in this country, Mr. Speaker, pay 60% of all the income taxes. Top 10% pay 60% of all the income taxes. The top 50% pay 100% of all the income taxes. About half of America today pays no income taxes whatsoever. In fact, a growing amount of American families are actually receiving money from the tax code instead of paying money in from the tax code. That's not what the tax code is for. But on both sides of the aisle, we agree that this tax code isn't working. The President thinks it's not working because it allows folks to pay nothing, and that's not fair. I'd tell you it's not working because it allows one company to pay one amount and its neighbor company to have to pay twice that amount, and that's not fair. Equity is what's fair, and I'll tell you the tax code for corporations, it shouldn't go from the 30s down to the 20s. It shouldn't go from the 30s down to the teens. It should go from the 30s down to zero, Mr. Speaker, to zero. Because businesses don't pay taxes. Their consumers pay taxes. I pay taxes when I shop at Walmart. Walmart's not paying the tax. They're raising the price on the good, and I'm paying the tax, and you're paying the tax, and every American family that shops there is paying the tax. So how do we get to something that defines our fair share? Well, Mr. Speaker, that brings me to the heart of the fair tax. I don't like the divisive games that are being played in America today, Mr. Speaker. I don't know why it is that what we see in the media and what we sometimes hear from the podiums is language designed to divide America. I can't think of a single strength of this country. I can't think of a single trait that makes this country great that is enhanced by dividing America. Right? That's why we always talk about the American dream, Mr. Speaker, something that unites us, something that brings all of our disparate views and hopes and dreams together into one understanding of what makes this country different from any other country on the planet. Mr. Speaker, my idea of fair, when I sit down with a blank sheet of paper to try to design a brand new tax code for this country, fair doesn't mean that we're going to try to ensure equal outcomes for every American. Fair means we're going to start with a level playing field for every American. Have you ever been in a community, Mr. Speaker, and you see somebody driving a brand new Porsche and you're wondering if they're paying their fair share? You ever been walking past a clothing store? You and I might be on our way down to the Goodwill, or Salvation Army, or TJ Maxx, or to Marshalls, and you see somebody walking into Brooks Brothers, and you're wondering if they're paying their fair share. You know, I remember growing up, had a good friend, lived next door. Family had everything: boats, lake houses, beach houses, brand new cars, fancy clothes. And when it came time to apply for college aid, we both filled out our applications. I didn't get a penny in federal financial aid because I got a note back that said, "Dear sir, your family saved too much. Family saved too much. My buddy next door, fancy cars, fancy houses, fancy clothes, he got back a note that said, "Congratulations, you qualify for a subsidized college education." You qualify for a subsidized college education. Why? Because in all of these flush years that your family has had, you spent it all. So now in your time of need, you have nothing and you qualify for a bonus. Mr. Speaker, that's not anything. That is not anything that makes this country great. What makes this country great is people being able to make their own choices about how they're going to live their life, and the federal government doesn't bail them out. Mr. Speaker, you and I weren't here when the bailouts came down the pipe, but I guarantee you we'd have both voted no. Both voted no for every penny of bailout money that came down the pipe, because the American government is not supposed to be about bailing out anybody. The American government is supposed to be about protecting the freedom of the American people, and that includes, Mr. Speaker, freedom to fail. Freedom to fail. You get to make the choices you want to make about your life, but you also have to bear the consequences. If you want to take great risks, if you have great success, you benefit from that. And if you have great failure, you pay the price for that. We cannot insulate people, Mr. Speaker, from the consequences of their action, but over and over and over again, that's what the tax code does. Oh, if you lose money, we want to protect you. If you make money, we want to punish you. Well, I don't get that. I don't understand that. Fairness for me is a level playing field for opportunity, not a level playing field for outcomes. And Mr. Speaker, you know we talk every day in this chamber about jobs, and by talk I mean we act every day to promote an environment in this nation that grows jobs. What do you think, Mr. Speaker, the American tax code does when a multinational corporation is trying to decide where it's going to put its next plant? What do you think it does? Because I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, with absolute certainty that America has the highest corporate tax rate of any nation on the planet. The number one highest. So you're a business person, Mr. Speaker. Where do you want to locate? You want to locate in a country that has ended all the loopholes, that's restored a fairness to the marketplace for a level playing field that allows our free enterprise system to work? Or do you want to locate your business in the country that has the single highest corporate tax rate in the world? Those are easy decisions, Mr. Speaker, and companies are making them every day. I talked to a CEO in my district about 6 months ago. He said, "Rob, I'm going to be leaving." He said, government's made it hard to pack up and leave. It's going to take me about 2 years, but I'm taking every job that's in this district and I'm moving them to Switzerland, because it's just not worth doing business in America anymore. Mr. Speaker, we have the hardest working workforce on the planet. We have the best education and transportation infrastructure on the planet. We have the finest education system on the planet. Nobody gives you more bang for your buck than the American worker, and yet people are deciding to take those jobs overseas. Why? It's not the American worker's fault, Mr. Speaker. It's our fault. As we have crafted a tax code that doesn't work, as we've crafted a regulatory structure that doesn't work. But the good news is, and it's good news, Mr. Speaker, there is nothing wrong with America that this body can't fix. Because I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, there is nothing wrong with America that this body didn't cause. Government is not the solution to our problems. In many times, government is the creator of our problems. I do not want this body, no matter how august. I do not want my 435 colleagues, no matter how well studied and well intended, to decide for me how my life should be led. That's never been what America was about. What America is about is making your own decisions for yourself, making your own decisions for your family, and knowing with absolute certainty, Mr. Speaker, absolute certainty, that by the sweat of your brow, by the power of your ideas, by the commitment that you make, you can make your tomorrow better than your today. I'll tell you, that's the American dream, Mr. Speaker. It's not about how much money you have in your pocket. It's not about what kind of house you live in or what kind of car you drive. It's about that you can decide today that you're going to take actions for yourself and for your family, and you're going to make tomorrow better. Hope, Mr. Speaker, hope is a priceless commodity, a priceless commodity. And I fear we're not growing hope in this country, Mr. Speaker, like we used to. I fear we are extinguishing the candle of hope in this country. And not out of malice, Mr. Speaker. That's what makes it so insidious. It's not out of malice. It's out of folks who believe in their heart, deep down inside, that they're passing these policies because they want to make America better. Mr. Speaker, America was better when Americans were running America. The whole idea of a republic isn't that we get to be king of this land collectively. Our job is simple. It is to protect the freedom of individuals back home so that individuals back home can make the decisions that work best for them. I'm going to tell you, Mr. Speaker, I come from the great state of Georgia. We're a little conservative in our part of the world and proud of it. If anybody's looking for a good conservative part of the world to be a part of, I invite you to come down. We've got some good real estate prices, a good job market. Come on down, be a part of what we have, Mr. Speaker. But I read a story about my friends in California. I enjoy visiting California. Don't want to move there. But it was a story about the AFL-CIO. No, I'm sorry. It was my friends at the Teamsters, about the Teamsters unionizing marijuana growers in California. Because, you know, medicinal marijuana is a big business out there in California these days, and so they unionize the marijuana growers. And so if you work hard and apply yourself and join the union, you can be a junior marijuana grower at about $25 an hour, I'm told. And if you really work hard and really apply yourself, you can exceed where you start and become a senior marijuana grower and get close to $35 an hour. That's what I'm told. Mr. Speaker, I think that's wonderful for those folks in California. We're not bringing unionized marijuana growing to the great state of Georgia. I'm not trying to stop folks in California from doing what they want to do, but it's not going to come to our great state of Georgia, and that's what makes this country great. We can choose for ourselves as individuals, as families, as communities, as states, how it is that we want to live our life, but not with the United States tax code. Mr. Speaker, the tax code manipulates every facet of your life. Every facet of your life. You're going to buy a green car, we're going to pay you money. You buy a car that burns too much gasoline, we're going to charge you a fuel premium. If you receive your income from dividends, we're going to give you a tax break. If you receive your dividends from working hard on the line every day, you're going to pay full freight. If you've had a great year this year, even if you hadn't made another penny in the rest of your life, we're going to tax you like you're rich. If you make a little bit this year, even though you've made millions every other year for the rest of your life, we're going to tax you like you're poor. Mr. Speaker, we manipulate behavior in line item after line item after line item in the United States Code, and candidly, folks on both sides of the aisle defend it. They defend it. As if we're really smart here, and I'll tell you, folks here work hard. I'm not down on Congress. The folks here in Congress work hard. But they don't know everything, nor can they, nor should they be burdened with that responsibility. But that's what happens in the tax code. Let me pass this tax incentive, because if only we encourage this behavior, all of America will be happier. And it's easy to hide things in the tax code. Again, 75,000 pages. Mr. Speaker, I encourage you to take a look at H.R. 25. Again, the single most widely co-sponsored piece of fundamental tax reform legislation in either the House or the Senate. And in fact, it's the most widely co-sponsored piece of tax reform legislation in both chambers. It ends every loophole Mr. Speaker, you hear folks every day down here on the House floor, I want you to end the loopholes for rich people. I want you to end the loopholes for oil companies. I want you to end the loopholes for Solyndra and the solar companies. I want you to end loophole, 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 loophole. Mr. Speaker, there's one bill in this House that does it all, and it's H.R. 25. No loopholes, no exceptions, no exemptions. We all pay the same. And it lets our free enterprise system work, Mr. Speaker. We talk about creating jobs in this country, Mr. Speaker. We have to do that, but our tax code is destroying jobs. We have to create new jobs, but Mr. Speaker, that's hard. Preserving the jobs we already have has to be a part of that. And yet we run jobs overseas each and every day, in large part because of our tax code. And more importantly, Mr. Speaker, the fair tax is revenue neutral. You know, so many folks think about a conservative Republican like me as liking every tax cut he can get his hands on. I do. I'm a big proponent of leaving more money in individuals' pockets. I always believe the American family will spend their own money better than we will spend it on their behalf in Washington, always. But, Mr. Speaker, there are bills to pay in Washington. We do need to support our troops. We do need to defend our homeland. We do need to protect our border. And so the fair tax brings in every penny of revenue that we bring in today. It's revenue neutral. In fact, given the bill that's in front of the Senate right now on payroll taxes, we're actually going to bring in more revenue with the fair tax than we bring in with the current system. But it's designed to be revenue neutral because I know that we must pay taxes. But we mustn't make it hard to do. That's a choice we've made in this body, and it's the wrong one. Mr. Speaker, take a look at H.R. 25, the fair tax. You can find out all about it at www.fairtax.org. It's all the information, all the studies. We started with a blank sheet of paper. We came up with a plan that starts everyone on a level playing field. And so far, Mr. Speaker, we've attracted enough co-sponsors on both sides of the Hill to make it the single most popular fundamental tax reform bill in Congress. And I thank you for giving me this time this afternoon to talk about it. And I yield back.